My name is Claire Ashford. I am 31 years old, and last Saturday morning at 9:47 a.m., I stood at the entrance of Hathaway Hall in Westbrook, Connecticut, a white stone venue I had spent 14 months planning, paying for, and building from nothing. And I watched a security guard named Dennis politely turn my mother away at the gate. She was wearing a pale blue fascinator and holding a clutch bag I'd never seen before. She was smiling, the way she always smiles when she wants the people around her to see that she is composed. But her eyes were doing something different. They were scanning the courtyard behind Dennis's shoulder, looking for a way through. There wasn't one. I had made sure of that 11 days earlier when I sent the revised guest list to the venue coordinator in a PDF titled, "Final. No changes." My mother was not on it. Neither was my sister Renata. Neither was anyone who had stood in that dining room 18 months before and said nothing while my mother placed a $7,500 ivory gown on the chair that was supposed to be mine. Just let that sit. Before I tell you what that dress meant and what it cost every person in that room, I need to take you back to where this actually started. Because it didn't start at the dress. It started at a dinner table in a house I grew up in on a Thursday night in October, with a question I should have stopped asking years earlier. Before I get into what happened at that dinner and what my mother said when she found out I had already started planning a wedding without telling, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if this story actually means something to you. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to know where you're listening from tonight. I read every single one. Let me take you back to autumn of 2022, Mill Haven, Connecticut. Population 4,200, the kind of place where people still announce engagements in the local paper and everyone shows up to the same church for funerals and graduations and nothing in between. I had driven 2 hours from my apartment in New Haven to have dinner with my family. It was a Thursday. The leaves on Whitmore Road were peak orange, the way they only get in that one specific week in October. And for about 40 minutes on the drive down, I had let myself believe this visit might go differently. It didn't. The house on Birchfield Lane was exactly as I'd left it. Colonial, white shutters. My mother's hydrangea bushes were dead for the season, cut back to stubs, which always made the house look like it was holding its breath. I rang the doorbell. I still rang the doorbell at my childhood home. I had been doing it for 6 years. Ever since the lock was changed during a summer I'd spent working in Burlington, and nobody told me. My mother, Patricia Ashford, opened the door in a burgundy blouse she'd had since 2009. She looked at me the way she always looked at me. A half-second scan top to bottom, like she was checking inventory. "You look tired," she said. "Not hello, not come in. Did you eat on the drive?" I told her I was fine. My father, Gerald Ashford, was at the table already, cutting bread with the same serrated knife he'd used my entire childhood. He nodded at me over his reading glasses. Gerald was not a complicated man. He was a man who had learned very early in his marriage that having an opinion required energy he preferred to spend elsewhere. He loved me, I believe, in the way a man loves something that requires nothing from him. Quietly, from a distance, reliably absent when it mattered. My sister Renata was there. She was 27 at the time, living rent-free in the house she'd grown up in, taking online classes in interior design that she'd been taking for 3 years without finishing a single module. Renata was beautiful in the specific way that certain people are beautiful, effortlessly, carelessly, as if beauty were simply the default setting and everything else required explanation. She was wearing a cream sweater, and her hair was loose, and she was laughing at something on her phone when I walked in. She glanced up. "Hey, Claire." That was it. "Hey, Claire," the way you'd greet someone who just walked into a waiting room. I sat down at the table. The fourth chair, the one to the left of my mother's, had a stack of fabric swatches and a catalog on it. I moved them to sit down. My mother's eyes went to the swatches immediately. "Careful," she said. "Those are from the boutique." I put them on the sideboard. I sat down. The first 20 minutes of dinner were unremarkable. Pot roast. A salad my mother had overdressed. Gerald asking about my job in a way that demonstrated he had no memory of what my job actually was. I work in healthcare administration at Yale New Haven Hospital. I manage compliance for 3 surgical departments. It is not glamorous, it is not the kind of work that earns my mother's interest, but it paid for my apartment, my car, and I will tell you now so you understand the full picture. It had been paying for a savings account I'd been quietly building for 2 years. A savings account with $34,000 in it. Money I had earmarked for a wedding, my own wedding, to a man named Daniel Keene, who had proposed to me 7 weeks earlier on a Tuesday morning over coffee in our apartment kitchen. No ring at first. Just his voice. Just him saying, "I want to marry you. Do you want to marry me?" And me saying yes before he'd finished the sentence. The ring came 3 days later. A simple oval sapphire in a gold band, $1,800 from an estate jeweler on Chapel Street. It was exactly what I'd wanted. I hadn't told my mother about the proposal yet. I was waiting for the right moment. This was not the right moment. But the question came out anyway. I don't know why I asked it. Some old reflex, some residual hope that things were different than I knew them to be. I looked at my mother and I said, "Mom, I have some news." The table went quiet. My father put his fork down. Renata looked up from her plate. I told them Daniel had proposed. I showed them my ring. The first person to speak was Renata. She said, "Oh, wow, that's a sapphire? Not congratulations, a classification, the way you'd identify a piece of furniture at an estate sale." My father cleared his throat and said, "Well, that's something." He picked up his fork. My mother said nothing for 4 full seconds. Then she reached over and took my hand, tilted it toward the light, and looked at the ring with an expression I can only describe as the face people make when they're trying to find something nice to say about a meal they didn't enjoy. "It's delicate," she said, "very simple." Then she let go of my hand and said, "We'll need to start talking about venues. I was thinking the Alderman Club on Post Road. They have a lovely room that fits 200. I've already spoken to Gail Fennick about her cousin who does flowers." I had been engaged for approximately 45 seconds. She had already spoken to Gail Fenwick's cousin. I told her carefully that Daniel and I were thinking of something smaller, something we would handle ourselves, something we'd be paying for ourselves. My mother tilted her head, just slightly. "You don't want help?" "We want to do it ourselves," I said. "We've already started saving." There was a silence in that dining room that had a specific texture to it. Heavy, pressurized. My father went back to his pot roast. Renata looked at her phone. My mother set her fork down very deliberately and looked at me across the table in a way that I had learned over 30 years to recognize as the beginning of something. "Of course," she said, "whatever makes you happy, Claire." Those 4 words were never about my happiness. They never had been. 3 people sat at that table and heard everything that was said. 3 people looked at their plates. Not one of them said a word in my direction that evening that wasn't about food or weather or the neighbor's new car. My father, my sister, my mother's oldest friend, Dolores Parrish, who had arrived mid-meal with a bottle of wine and stayed for dessert. None of them said congratulations. Not once. Not that night. I drove 2 hours back to New Haven with the windows down in the October cold and the radio off. Daniel was waiting up. He didn't ask how it went. He just looked at my face and said, "Come here." I didn't cry until I was in the bathroom with the door closed. Even then, only for about 2 minutes. Then I washed my face and went to bed. The dress arrived in my life 6 weeks later. It did not arrive with a warning. My mother called on a Sunday morning and asked if I could come by. She said she had something she wanted to show me. She used the word exciting. That word, in my mother's vocabulary, has always meant something she has already decided, being presented to me as a gift I should be grateful for. I drove to Millhaven. When I walked into the living room, the dress was on the couch. Not hanging. On the couch, laid out flat, tissue paper underneath, a garment bag folded beside it. It was ivory, not white. Ivory, specifically the exact shade that bridal tradition reserves for one person at a wedding and one person only. It was strapless, with a sweetheart neckline and a skirt that pooled at the bottom in layers of silk organza. The bodice was hand-sewn with tiny seed pearls in a pattern that swept from the left hip to the right shoulder. It was, objectively, a beautiful dress. It was not my dress. I had not chosen it. I had not tried it on. I had not been consulted. Renata was sitting in the armchair to the left of the couch, legs crossed, watching my face with the calm attention of someone who already knows the ending of a film. My mother was standing beside the dress with both hands clasped in front of her, practically vibrating. She said, "Well, what do you think?" I said, "What is this?" "It's Renata's dress," she said, "for the wedding. I ordered it from Levine Bridal in Hartford. They had to fly the fabric in from Lyon. It took 8 weeks. I stood there for a moment. I want to be precise about this. I did not yell. I did not make a scene. I stood there in my coat with my car keys still in my hand, and I looked at an ivory gown that my mother had spent $7,500 on. I found out the exact amount 2 days later, from the receipt she'd left in the kitchen drawer she's never bothered to lock, for my sister to wear to my wedding. I said, "Renata is a guest at my wedding, Mom, not a bride." My mother tilted her head, the head tilt. She deployed it like a tool. "She's your sister, Claire. She should look beautiful. She's going to be photographed." "Everyone is photographed at weddings," I said. "That's not the point." "You're not even wearing white," my mother said. And there it was, the first real reveal. She knew what dress I'd chosen. I hadn't told her, which meant Renata had looked at my Pinterest board, which I'd sent to my maid of honor, Serena Okafor, in a private message. "You said you were wearing Dusty Rosa. The ivory isn't even a conflict." Pause. She had thought about this. She had prepared this argument. She had an answer for the objection before the objection was even made. I looked at Renata. Renata looked back at me with an expression of perfect blankness. Not malice, not guilt, blankness. The look of a person who has been told that whatever is about to happen is not their problem to solve. I looked at my father, who was in the doorway to the kitchen. He had a cup of coffee in his hand and was watching the three of us the way a man watches weather. He doesn't plan to go outside in. I looked at Dolores Parrish, who had apparently come for Sunday brunch and was sitting at the kitchen table just beyond my father, very deliberately looking at the crossword in her lap. Nobody said a word in my direction. My mother stepped toward me. She put one hand on my arm, light, deliberate, the touch she used when she needed an audience to see her being reasonable. "I just want everyone to look lovely," she said. "That's all I've ever wanted, for this family to look lovely together." There it was, the sentence that made the story about her, about the family, about an aesthetic arrangement she was curating, in which I was a piece that had been moved slightly out of position and needed to be corrected. I named what I saw. Not out loud. I named it in my chest, where I've kept most of the true things I know about my family, filed carefully in the dark. Then I did something quiet and irreversible. I uncapped the pen I keep in my coat pocket, a cheap black Bic, the kind I use for signing compliance forms at the hospital, and I wrote my cell phone number on the back of a receipt from my own purse. I set it on the arm of the couch beside the garment bag. And then I said, very evenly, "If Renata comes to my wedding in that dress, she won't be coming in. I need you to understand that clearly before you make a decision you can't take back." I put my keys back in my pocket. I left the house. The drive home took 1 hour and 54 minutes. I know because I checked the time when I left and again when I got home, and I sat in the parking garage of my building for 6 more minutes before I went inside. Daniel was in the kitchen. He looked at me. I told him everything, standing by the counter with my coat still on. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "What do you want to do?" "Exactly what I said I'd do," I told him. He nodded. That was it. He nodded, and he made us both tea, and we sat at the table and started a spreadsheet. I want to back up now. Because the dress was not the beginning. The dress was just the first time something happened in front of enough furniture that it became undeniable. To understand what the dress meant, you have to understand what the previous 8 years looked like. And to understand that, I need to tell you about the day I left Millhaven for good. I was 22. It was August 2015. I had graduated from UConn Stores in May with a degree in Health Services Administration. I had a job offer from a medical practice management firm in New Haven, entry level, $38,500 a year. I had $600 in my checking account, $1,400 in a savings account, and a 2008 Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard that I'd been driving since junior year. I had no credit card. I had student loans. I had 2 suitcases and a box of books, and the specific kind of determination that only exists in people who have spent long enough being told they are not the impressive one, because that was the assignment I'd been given in my family. Renata was the impressive one. Renata was the one who made my mother's friends lean in at dinner parties. Renata was the one whose school photos went on the mantle in matching frames while mine sat in the junk drawer in the kitchen until I stopped looking for them. Renata was 6 years younger than me and had been the center of every room I'd ever shared with my family since she was born. I am not saying this with bitterness. I am saying it the way a scientist describes a weather pattern. This was the climate I grew up in. I learned to work within it, and then I learned to leave it. My first apartment in New Haven was a studio on Wally Avenue, 3rd floor, no elevator, with a bathroom so small the door opened into the shower. Rent was $890 a month. It smelled faintly of whoever had lived there before me, sandalwood and old carpet. I slept on an air mattress for 3 weeks until I found a bed frame at a secondhand shop on Grand Avenue for $40. I bought a plate, a bowl, a mug, and a set of dollar store cutlery. I ate rice, frozen vegetables, eggs, and whatever the grocery store on the corner marked down on Tuesdays. I had no emergency contact I could actually use. My mother was listed on every form I signed that year. Hospital forms, lease agreement, HR paperwork, because the field was mandatory. But I knew, with the certainty of long experience, that if something happened to me on a Tuesday night on Wally Avenue, my mother's first call would not be to me. It would be to Dolores Parrish, to tell her what had happened, and to wonder aloud what it meant for the family. There were no birthday calls, not consistently. Some years she remembered. Most years she called 3 or 4 days late, always a little put upon, always with a reason why she'd been busy that framed the lateness as something I should absorb gracefully. I absorbed it. I kept moving. The first person outside my family who treated me like a person worth paying attention to was a woman named Ruth Castellano. She was the office manager at the practice management firm, 54 years old, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the specific no-nonsense warmth of a woman who had stopped performing patients a long time ago. On my third day, she pulled me into her office, closed the door, and said, "You check your work twice." I said, "Yes. Is that a problem?" She said, "No. It's a gift. Don't let anyone train it out of you." That was it. But I went home that night and sat on my air mattress and felt something shift, very slightly, in the architecture of what I thought was possible. I will tell you now so you understand the full picture. Ruth Castellano is the reason I ended up in healthcare compliance. She saw something in the way I handled detail-heavy work and pointed me toward a certification program she said would change my earning trajectory. She was right. It took 4 years and $6,000 in course fees that I paid in installments, and it was the best investment I have ever made in myself. There was no montage, just alarm clocks and textbooks and falling asleep with a highlighter uncapped on my chest. Just 6-day work weeks and skipped vacations and a color-coded budget spreadsheet I updated every Sunday night without fail. The invisible costs of distance from my family were real. I carried them the way you carry a low-grade fever. Not dramatic, just constant. There was always the background hum of knowing my mother was telling a version of my story to people in Millhaven, a version in which I was difficult, in which I didn't appreciate what I had, in which my leaving was an act of ingratitude rather than an act of survival. I couldn't correct that story. I wasn't in the room where it was being told. People in my life would meet someone from Millhaven and come back with a strange look. I ran into someone who knows your mom, then a pause. Then, "She seems really worried about you." They always meant it kindly. They had no way to know that my mother's worry was a performance that cost her nothing, and me everything. The first morning I woke up without her voice in my head was a Saturday in March 2017. I was 24. I had slept 8 full hours, which was unusual. I woke up before my alarm and I lay in bed for a moment in the gray morning light, and I waited for the first thought, the one that usually arrived within seconds of consciousness, the cataloging thought, the one that ran through the list of things I had done wrong or failed to be or not yet managed to become. It didn't come. I lay there for 4 more minutes. Nothing, just the sound of the street, outside, and the hum of my refrigerator and my own breathing, slow and even. I got up. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table with a library book and read for 40 minutes before I did anything else. It was unremarkable. That was the remarkable thing about it. That was the morning I understood what all those years of quiet, grinding work had actually been for. If you're still here, and I hope you are, hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to get a lot more complicated. The dress was just the opening move. What came after it is what I actually need you to hear. Let me take you through the years quickly, not the way people do in videos when they say and then things got better, because that's not how it works. There was no better that arrived all at once. There were just years, and in each year something became possible that hadn't been the year before. 2016, I finished my first compliance certification. Got a raise to $52,000, moved out of Wally Avenue into a 1-bedroom on Orange Street with actual closet space, bought a real bed frame used from a couple moving to Oregon. $60. I still have it, 2017. Took on a second certification, HIPAA and Clinical Documentation Specialist. Nights and weekends for 7 months. When I passed the exam, I sat in the parking lot of the testing center and ate a granola bar in the car, and then drove home and went to sleep. There was no one to call. I called Daniel eventually. We had been dating for 4 months at that point, still in the tentative stage, still learning each other's patterns. He said, "I knew you would." "You couldn't have known that," I said. "Yes, I could," he said. "You check everything twice." He had heard that phrase from me once, offhand, describing how I approach documentation reviews. He had filed it and used it back at the right moment. That was when I understood he was paying attention in a way I had not been paid attention to before. 2018, I was hired by Yale New Haven Hospital as a compliance analyst. $71,000 base, full benefits, a pension contribution. I cried in the bathroom at the coffee shop where I took the call. Then I washed my face and walked to the parking garage and sat in my car and made a list of what I needed to update. Renter's insurance, 401k contribution rate, the student loan overpayment schedule I'd set up that would now get me out of debt 8 months sooner. Ruth Castellano had written me a reference letter. When I emailed to thank her, she wrote back 3 sentences: "You earned it, not me. Go do something with it." 2019, I met Vera Lynn. She was a risk management analyst in the department 1 floor above mine, hired 6 months after me, small and quiet and precise in the way of someone who has learned that precision is a form of protection. We ate lunch together for the first time because we were both eating at our desks, and she walked by and said, "That smells good. What is it?" "Rice and leftover roasted vegetables," I said, "from Sunday." "I ate crackers and a protein bar," she said. "I forgot to pack lunch." "Sit down," I said. "I have too much anyway." She sat. We ate in near silence. Before she left, she said, "Same time tomorrow?" I learned over the following months that Vera had grown up in Queens, that she had paid for her own college education by working night shifts at a hotel front desk all 4 years, and that she had not spoken to her father in 6 years over something that had happened at a family birthday party. Something he said in front of her cousins that she would not repeat, but that had clearly shaped the architecture of everything she'd built since. We never talked about it directly. We talked around it the way 2 people who have come from the same general geography talk around it. We understood each other in the shorthand of people who have had to build their own floor plans from scratch. Our bonding moment was not a triumph. It was a Tuesday afternoon in February. The heat in our section of the building had gone out, and we were both sitting at our desks in our coats, not talking, just working. At some point, Vera said, without looking up from her screen, "Do you ever think about how much energy it takes to just keep going?" I said, "Every day." She said, "Yeah." We went back to our screens. That was it. That was the whole exchange. But something settled between us that afternoon that has never unsettled. 2020, the pandemic. We worked from home. I managed 3 surgical department compliance audits remotely during a crisis with incomplete data, while the hospital system was changing policy every 72 hours. I did not miss a deadline, not one. At the end of the year, my supervisor, a quiet man named Marcus Webb, sent me an email that said, "Claire, you held the line when nobody else could. That has been noted at levels above mine. Thank you." I printed that email. It's in a folder in my desk at home. The folder is blue. It's the only thing in it. I will tell you now so you understand the full picture. I almost called my mother that year. Twice. Once in March when the hospital was in its first surge and I hadn't slept properly in 11 days and I was sitting on my bathroom floor at 2 a.m. with my back against the tub, and once in August on my birthday, which I spent alone in my apartment with a bottle of wine I'd been saving and a movie I'd already seen twice. Both times I picked up my phone. Both times I thought about what she would say, the specific way she would recalibrate the conversation until it was about her worry, her difficulty, her sacrifice. And I set the phone down. I do not regret setting the phone down. 2021, I was promoted to compliance manager. $94,000. I oversaw a team of 4 analysts. I also that year began putting an additional $1,200 a month into a dedicated savings account. I labeled it simply ours. And then the box. There is a small cedar box in my closet. It is 8 inches long, 4 inches wide, with a brass latch that sticks slightly. My grandmother, Helen Ashford, gave it to me the summer before she died when I was 19. She pressed it into my hands in her kitchen in Glastonbury and said, "This is for when you need to remember where you came from, not the hard parts, the good parts." I put it in every apartment I moved into. I put it on the same shelf every time, top shelf of the closet, left side, and I did not open it for 12 years. I don't know exactly why. I think I was afraid of what remembering the good parts would do to me when so much else was complicated. I think I needed to be strong enough to hold both things at once before I could open it. I opened it in November 2021. Inside, a photograph of my grandmother and me at the beach in Hammonasset, summer of 1996. I am 4 years old. She is laughing at something off camera. I am holding a piece of seaweed toward the photographer like a gift. I look absolutely delighted with myself. A birthday card she'd written me when I turned 16. Inside, in her looping cursive, "You are the one who sees everything clearly. That will be your greatest gift and your hardest road. I am proud of you already, for everything you are going to do." A folded piece of paper with a recipe for her apple cake, written on the back of an envelope, with a small note at the bottom, "The secret is patience. You can't rush it." And a pressed flower, a small yellow one I didn't recognize, tucked between 2 pieces of wax paper. I sat on the floor of my closet for a long time, not crying, just holding each thing, just letting her be present in the room with me for a few minutes. What I understood sitting there was this: There had always been someone who saw me clearly. She was gone. But what she had seen was still true. It had been true all along. My mother's version of me was not the accurate one. It had never been. I put everything back in the box. I closed the latch. I put it back on the shelf. Then I went to the kitchen and I called Daniel and I said, "Do you want to come over? I want to make dinner." He was there in 20 minutes. We made soup. We didn't talk about the box. We didn't need to. 2022, Daniel proposed. I said yes. I drove to Mill Haven and had the worst dinner of my adult life and drove home and started a spreadsheet. You know the rest of that part. What you don't know yet is what happened between December 2022 and September 2023 while I was planning my wedding in silence and my mother was planning something else entirely. After the dress confrontation in November 2022, I went quiet. Not dramatically. I didn't send an announcement. I didn't have a phone call with my mother in which I declared the nature of our relationship. I just stopped initiating. I stopped calling on Sundays. I stopped driving to Mill Haven for dinners that left me hollow. I answered texts when they came, briefly, factually, and I did not offer information about the wedding. Not the date, not the venue, not the guest list, nothing. Daniel and I booked Hathaway Hall in Westbrook in January 2023. Capacity 80 guests. A converted stone carriage house on the Connecticut shoreline, all white walls and warm oak floors and windows that faced the water. The deposit was $4,200. We paid it the same day we signed the contract. We hired a caterer named Priya Mehta, who had a small operation out of Guilford and made food that tasted like she cared about it. We booked a photographer named Owen Park who shot everything on film and delivered results that looked like memory rather than documentation. We found a florist at the New Haven Farmers Market, a woman named Sasha Rowe who worked out of her garage and charged a third of what a downtown shop would have. Wildflowers, dahlias and ranunculus and trailing eucalyptus in clay pots on every table. My maid of honor was Serena Okafor, my closest friend since college, who cried when I asked her and then immediately said, "Okay, I need you to tell me the exact vision because I have 4 spreadsheet templates ready." Daniel's best man was his brother, Marcus Keene, who is one of those people who makes every room warmer without saying anything particularly notable. Just present, just reliably, genuinely there. We told almost no one in my family. Not because we were hiding. Because we had learned over the previous year that telling my mother anything was the same as handing her the architecture of something she would immediately begin renovating. She found out in July 2023. The mechanism was exactly what I would have expected. A woman from Mill Haven named Constance Harlow, who had gone to Yukon with Daniel's aunt, had seen our wedding website. We'd made a simple one for out-of-town guests. Constance knew my mother through the garden club. She called her on a Wednesday afternoon, apparently to offer congratulations, not understanding that my mother did not know the wedding was 9 weeks away. I know all of this because Constance later sent me a mortified handwritten note apologizing for the inadvertent disclosure. She had a lovely cursive. I kept the note. It was not her fault. The first message from my mother arrived Thursday morning at 7:14 a.m. A text, "We need to talk about some things I've recently learned." Then a voicemail that afternoon in a voice so carefully controlled it was its own kind of signal. "Claire, it's Mom. I would like you to call me when you have a chance. I think there has been some miscommunication and I'd like to clear things up before we all say something we can't take back." The "we all" was doing a lot of work in that sentence. Then a voicemail from my Aunt Patricia's sister Sandra, who lived in Springfield and called me maybe twice a year on neutral territory. "Honey, your mom is very upset. I think she just wants to be included. Can you give her a call just to smooth things over?" Then a text from Renata. Just, "Mom is crying." No punctuation, no context, just the fact, delivered like a weather report as if my response to it was self-evident. Then a voicemail from Dolores Parrish, who had no business in this conversation whatsoever, offering in her warm, slightly theatrical voice to mediate because families are complicated and these things can be worked through with a little grace on everyone's part. 5 messages in 36 hours, each one framed differently, each one built around the same request. Not, "I'm sorry," not, "I understand why you felt the need to plan this without me," not, "I know I handled the dress badly." Every single message was asking for the same thing, to be let back in, to be given a role, to be included in the event that was still in my mother's interior logic, something that was happening to her rather than something I was building with the man I had chosen to spend my life with. I listened to all of it. I sat at my kitchen table on a Thursday evening with my phone face up and I played every message from start to finish. Daniel sat across from me, reading something, not asking. When the last one ended, I put my phone face down on the table. I did not call any of them back. The morning of the wedding was cool for September. 58 degrees at 8 a.m. with a light off the water that turned everything gold. I stood in the bridal suite at Hathaway Hall, a small room with a full-length mirror and a window that faced the garden. And Serena helped me into my dress. The dress was mine. It was the one I had chosen. It was a column-style silk crepe in a color called antique rose, deeper than blush, softer than mauve. It had long sleeves and a low back and a modest train. It was simple and considered, and entirely me. I had found it at a small atelier in Middletown, owned by a woman named Elise Fontaine, who had let me stand in it for 40 minutes while she adjusted the back seam until it was perfect. It cost $1,900. I had it for the rest of my life. At 9:15, I learned about my mother, Dennis, the security coordinator at Hathaway Hall, a tall, steady man who handled everything with the calm of someone who had seen every possible wedding day scenario, knocked on the bridal suite door and told me quietly that a woman identifying herself as my mother had arrived at the front gate. She was with another woman and a man. She had asked to be let through to help with setup. Dennis said this with perfect neutrality. He had the revised guest list. Her name was not on it. He was informing me, not asking me. I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, "She knows she's not on the list. Please hold the boundary." "Understood," he said, and he went back to his post. Serena looked at me from across the room. I shook my head once. She handed me a glass of water. We moved on. The ceremony happened at 11 a.m. in the garden, under a canopy of white oak branches and trailing white wisteria that Sasha Rowe had spent 2 hours constructing the morning before. 80 people, every single one of them chosen deliberately, every one of them someone who had shown up in some meaningful way in the years it had taken to get here. Ruth Castellano was in the 4th row, in a green dress with her reading glasses on. She cried during the vows. She would deny it completely if you asked her. Vera Lynn was in the 2nd row, next to her girlfriend Mara. She didn't cry. She sat very straight and very still, and when I walked by, she gave me one small nod that meant more than most speeches ever could. Daniel's father, Edward Keene, a soft-spoken retired school principal from Enfield, walked me partway down the aisle after I asked him if he would. He had said yes before I finished the sentence. He didn't know what that meant to me. I didn't explain it. He just did it. Daniel was at the end of the aisle. He looked at me the way I'd hoped someone would look at me for most of my adult life, like I was exactly right, like there was no inventory being taken. Like arriving was enough. The vows were ones we had written ourselves. I won't share all of them, but I will tell you that mine included the line, "I choose to build my life from honest ground, and I choose to build it with you." Not one person in that garden missed the weight of those words. Not one person there needed it explained. The reception was in the main hall. Priya Mehta's food was extraordinary. Braised short rib, roasted cauliflower with pomegranate, a soup that made Marcus Keene go back twice. The wildflowers on the tables looked like they'd been gathered from a meadow an hour before. Owen Park moved through the room like a ghost, barely visible, and the photographs he would send us 3 weeks later would be the most beautiful images I have ever seen of people I love. At some point in the late afternoon, the golden hour around 5 p.m., Serena gave a toast. She is a remarkable person, Serena. She has the gift of saying exactly what is true without making the truth feel like an accusation. She said, "Claire has spent her entire adult life building something real, quietly, without applause. And what you're all sitting inside right now, this room, this day, this marriage, is what that looks like when it's finished." She paused. She looked at me. "You built this. Every single piece of it." 2 tables away, Ruth Castellano reached for her napkin. I saw her. She'll still deny it. My mother was not in the room. But that evening, at 9 p.m., after the guests had eaten and the dancing had started and Daniel was spinning his mother in circles near the window, I slipped to the small office off the main hall, sat down at the desk, and opened my laptop. I had composed the email 11 days earlier. I had read it 4 times and revised it twice, and then I'd saved it in drafts and left it alone. I read it one more time. It was 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph named, clearly and without embellishment, what had happened with the dress, what the dress had represented, and what the silence around it had cost. The second paragraph said this: "I am not willing to have a relationship in which my choices are treated as problems to be managed and my absence is treated as an injury to be recovered from. I am willing to have a different kind of relationship if you ever decide that is something you want to build. That door is conditional, but it is not closed. I do not need an apology to move forward. I need a change in behavior. Those are not the same thing. Congratulations to you too if you'd like to receive it." Today was a very good day. I hit send. Then I closed the laptop and went back out to the reception and danced with my husband for the rest of the night. There was no scene. There was no confrontation in the garden. There was no tearful exchange. at a gate. The security guard did his job, I did mine. The day was exactly what I had made it. That is the thing about building something with your own hands. Nobody can take it back. The fallout arrived in waves, the way fallout always does, not all at once but in concentric rings spreading outward from the center of the event, reaching people in different orders, doing different damage. The first ring hit Millhaven immediately. Constance Harlow, who had inadvertently triggered the whole sequence by calling my mother in July, apparently felt guilty enough about it that she told 3 people in the garden club exactly why she'd called, which meant that the nature of the situation, the dress, the gate, the revised guest list, was common knowledge in certain circles of Millhaven by the following Tuesday. I know this because a woman named Barbara Cho, who had been in my high school graduating class and now worked at the county clerk's office, sent me a message on Instagram that said, "Hey, I heard about the wedding. Good for you. I always thought your mom was a piece of work." I thanked her and did not elaborate. The second ring hit my Aunt Sandra in Springfield, who had left me that voicemail in July asking me to smooth things over. She called me 3 weeks after the wedding. I answered. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "I heard it was beautiful." "It was," I said. Another pause. Then, "I think I should have said something sooner. About a lot of things. I don't know if that means anything at this point." It was not an apology exactly. It was a person standing in the doorway of one, deciding whether to walk through. I told her I appreciated her saying so. We talked for another 15 minutes about nothing in particular. It was the most honest conversation I'd had with anyone in my extended family in years. It wasn't enough to repair anything. It wasn't worthless either. The third ring reached my father. Gerald called me in October, 6 weeks after the wedding. He asked if I was well. I told him yes. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Your grandmother would have loved that dress you wore." I stood in my kitchen and held the phone and did not say anything for a moment. "Thank you, Dad," I said. That was all he offered. He was not built for more. But he had found the truest thing he could say, and he had said it, and for a man who had spent 30 years choosing silence, that was something. I do not know what to make of it entirely. I am still holding it the way you hold a thing you're not sure is fragile. Renata did not call. She sent a text in early October. It said, "I'm sorry I wore the dress. Mom pushed me and I didn't push back. I know that's not enough. I don't know what enough looks like. I read it twice. Then I put my phone down and waited 3 days before I responded because I wanted to answer from a considered place and not from the immediate reflex of either forgiveness or refusal. When I did reply, I wrote, I appreciate that. I'm not in a place where I can have a close relationship with you right now. That may change. I'll let you know if it does." She read it immediately based on the timestamp. She didn't respond. That was probably the right call on her part. As for my mother, she did not respond to the email I sent on the night of the wedding. Not the next day, not the week after, not in October. A card arrived at the beginning of November, a plain white envelope with her handwriting on the front, addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Keene, a detail that is its own small story. Inside was a store-bought card with a generic congratulations message. She had signed it, Mom. No note, no addition, just her name. I put the card on the kitchen counter. Daniel looked at it. Neither of us said anything about it. Eventually, I put it in a drawer, not the junk drawer, a different one, a drawer I can open or not open by choice. I learned from Constance Harlow, who continued to send me occasional updates with an earnestness I found genuinely touching, that my mother had stepped down from her role as garden club treasurer in November. The official reason was a health issue, which was plausible. The unofficial reason, which Constance relayed with obvious discomfort, was that several members of the club had begun to find the story she'd been telling about the wedding, the version in which she'd been blindsided by a daughter who had always been difficult, harder to sustain in the presence of people who knew Constance's version. The accounting didn't add up. Stories that depend on the absence of the other person tend to develop cracks when that person has been present enough over enough years to leave traces. I did not celebrate this. I did not feel triumph. I felt something quieter and less satisfying than either of those things. The specific feeling of watching a consequence arrive at its proper destination after a very long delay. Like finally finding a piece of mail that was lost for years. It's real. It matters. But by the time it gets to you, you've already figured out how to live without whatever was inside. In January 2024, Daniel and I set up a small fund through the hospital foundation. We put $3,000 into it to start, with a commitment to add $150 a month. Its purpose is narrow and specific. It provides emergency financial assistance to women in the Yale New Haven system, employees and patients both, who are navigating housing instability connected to domestic or family estrangement. Not crisis intervention. Not a hotline. just money, available quickly, with no required explanation beyond a form that says, I need this to keep myself stable while I figure out what comes next. We named it the Helen Ashford Emergency Fund, after my grandmother, who pressed a cedar box into my hands in her kitchen and said, this is for when you need to remember where you came from. Not the hard parts, the good parts. 12 women used it in its first year. We got 12 thank you notes, which we didn't ask for and weren't required. We kept all of them in a manila folder on the kitchen shelf. Nobody knows about it except Daniel, Serena, and Vera. That feels exactly right. Last Thursday, Daniel and I had people over for dinner. 8 of us around a table that seats 6, with 2 folding chairs added at the ends that made the whole arrangement slightly precarious and entirely right. Serena was there with her partner, James. Vera and Mara, Daniel's brother Marcus and his wife Priya, and our neighbor Calvin, a retired electrician from the building who had started knocking on our door about a year ago with questions about his thermostat and had gradually become someone we simply set a place for. The plates don't match. I have 4 blue ones, 2 white ones, and 2 I bought at a farmer's market in Woodstock that are glazed in a color that could be called sage or could be called gray, depending on the light. The wine was a $14 bottle from a winery in Guilford that Daniel found last summer. The food was the pot roast recipe I'd been refining since my early years on Wally Avenue, plus Vera's dumplings, which she makes from memory and never writes down. The conversation moved the way conversation moves around a table where people actually know each other. It jumped. It circled back. Someone said something that made everyone talk over each other for a minute, and then someone else said something that made the table go quiet with the good kind of quiet. At one point, Calvin raised his glass and said, "To the cook." People raised their glasses. I looked around the table. Every single person there looked back, not through me, not past me, at me, directly. Without inventory, at the original table on Birchfield Lane, there was always a chair with something on it, always a catalog or a stack of fabric swatches or someone's bag, something on the chair I was supposed to sit in as if the space needed to be gently established as not entirely mine. I moved those things every time. I sat down every time. I ate the overdressed salad and the pot roast, and I tried. On Thursday, my chair was empty before I sat in it. It had been empty all day, waiting. That's the whole difference. That's the only difference that ever mattered. If you're still listening, I want to say something directly to you. If any part of this story felt familiar, not the specific events, but the specific feeling of them, then you probably already know which part I mean. The dinner where the topic changed before you could finish your sentence. The thing bought, arranged, or decided without your input, presented as generosity. The silence that followed when you named what was happening. The witnesses who looked at their plates. You know the words they use. Difficult, sensitive, ungrateful, too much, never satisfied. Making everything about yourself. I want to tell you what those words actually are. Those words are the sound of someone losing control of a story they never had the right to tell. They are deployed at the specific moment when you stop performing the role that was assigned to you before you were old enough to consent to it. They are panic, dressed up as diagnosis. You are not difficult, you are clear. And clarity in certain rooms feels like a threat. The hardest part of what I did was not sending the email. It was not the revised guest list. It was not standing in a room full of people who expected me to keep shrinking and deciding, quietly, that I would not. The hardest part was the years before all of that. The years of ordinary Tuesdays where I made a spreadsheet instead of a phone call and went to sleep on time and got up and did it again. The years where nobody was watching and there was no moment of vindication on the horizon. Just the work, just the choice made daily to build something real on honest ground. That is not a dramatic story, but it is the actual story. And I think it might be yours too. The core truth of everything I've told you is this. You cannot be seen by someone who has already decided what you are. And you cannot build a life on a table where your chair is always slightly occupied by something else. But you can build a table of your own. With mismatched plates and a $14 bottle of wine and 8 people who look at you directly, you can start the spreadsheet tonight. I want to leave you with one question. If your mother, or whoever holds that role in your story, called you tomorrow, after years of silence, after years of a narrative that cast you as the problem, what do you think they would say? Would it be "help me," or would it be "I'm sorry"? Drop it in the comments. Just those 2 words, or as many as you need. I read every single one. I always do. If this story stayed with you, there are more in this same vein. Quiet stories about people who chose clarity over comfort and what that cost them and gave them in return. They're all here whenever you're ready. Thank you for listening tonight. I'll see you in the next one.